know it can be a bit overwhelming, but I'm here to tell you there's nothing to worry about. You'll do fine. They're left in some kind of free roaming mode at night. Something about their servos locking up if they get turned off for too long. They used to be allowed to walk around during the day too, but then there was the bite of 87. Yeah. It's amazing that the human body can live without the frontal lobe.
The Bite of 87. A tale as old as time. So let's recap everything we know about it. It was first mentioned by Phone Guy, now officially known as Ralph, in FNAF 1 on your first night, talking about how in 1987 an animatronic ended up attacking someone by biting them in the forehead and removing their frontal lobe, but the person was able to survive the attack.
They used to be allowed to walk around during the day too, but then there was the bite of 87. Yeah. It's amazing that the human body can live without the frontal lobe, you know?
After this, we would get FNAF 2, a prequel game that actually took place in 1987 where the bite happened. However, we didn't really get any clear-cut information on who was responsible for the bite here. We would later get FNAF 3, which gave us absolutely nothing, and then we started getting teasers for FNAF 4, and this is where things started to get interesting. On Scott's website, when he started putting teasers out for the fourth game, people found that in the source code there were lots of 8s and 7s sprinkled throughout it, and because of that, many thought that we might get the answer to who the culprit behind the bite of 87 was. People also did think this for another reason, but that is something I will get into later. And besides a one-off joke made in FNAF World about how Bounce Pod was actually the culprit who did the bite, that was really the last time it was ever brought up within the franchise. That was until the release of the week before, where we got new details about the bite, like how the victim isn't able to talk or do much else really, along with other details that will also go into more depth later. Today, I will be putting an answer on who the culprit behind the bite of 87 actually is, because I think at this point we have enough evidence to answer what character was responsible for it. But before we do that, we need to discuss something that's pretty important. In FNAF 4, we are shown a bite, and I would just like to remind people that this is not the bite of 87. I know the majority of you know this already, however I know there may be at least one person who maybe still be a bit confused, so let's go over the reasons and debunk why this isn't the bite of 87. Reason number 1. Ralph mentions that in the first game that the person who got bit was able to survive. However, the crying child in the final cutscene of FNAF 4, we can hear a heart monitor flatline, meaning that the bite in fact did kill him. Reason number 2. FNAF 2 takes place in the year 1987, and Ralph talks about how Fredbear's has been closed for years at this point.
We're going to try to contact the original restaurant owner. I think the name of the place was Fredbear's Family Diner or something like that. It was closed for years though. I doubt we'll be able to track anybody down.
Meaning that the bite in FNAF 4 has happened years prior to the second game. Reason 3. Remember earlier when I mentioned the source code on Scott's website having 8s and 7s sprinkled throughout it? Well, shortly before the release of FNAF 4, one of the 7s in the source code was changed to a 3, seemingly foreshadowing the bite of 83 that would actually show up in FNAF 4. Reason 4. In FNAF 4, we can see on the TV screen that's playing the Fredbear and Friends show that it has the year 1983 on the title card. Along with this, in the private room and sister location, we can type 1983 into the wall code showing the FNAF 4 experiment rooms. And in the Curse of Dreadbear DLC for Help Wanted, a very much FNAF 4 themed Halloween DLC, we can see a banner with the words Fall Fest 83 on it, once again tying FNAF 4 to 1983. Reason 5. Scott just made a post on Reddit confirming that this was in fact the bite of 83. In 2017, before the release of FNAF 6, Scott just made a post on Reddit about some major debates within the community at the time, where he references one of MatPat's videos that have come out recently around this time, telling people if they were concerned about things like Mic Trap or if they were confused on the FNAF 4 bite to watch this video. And it's in this video where MatPat says that the FNAF 4 bite happens in the year 1983, confirming the fact that this is the bite of 83 and not the bite of 87. And finally, reason 6. Just for a little extra flavor on top, in the week before, Ralph talks about how the bite of 83 used to be called the Big Bite before the bite of 87 happened, confirming that once again, there are in fact 2 separate bites. And now with that misconception out of the way, let's begin to talk about the culprits behind the bite of 87 and begin to eliminate them one by one. So let's begin with the obvious ones, Puppet, BB, and JJ. All 3 of them can easily be crossed off the list because none of them have actual moving jaws. And no, before someone brings up Phantom BB, that's not the actual BB. That's just a hallucination created and controlled by Springtrap that doesn't exist till decades later. I also want to talk about the shadow animatronics. The shadows are never actually seen visibly attacking someone, and the Fazbear Fright story Hide and Seek kinda doubles down on that. Where in the story, Shadow Bonnie is only really seen psychologically messing with our main character Toby rather than physically attacking him. And while yeah, this probably isn't really the same Shadow Bonnie as in FNAF 2, this is still showing us that creatures like this seemingly don't have the capabilities of physically harming someone. And at most, it's kinda like the movie, where Mike is being attacked by the spirits in his dreams, only for him to wake up with the same scars and cuts on him in real life. But that seems to be the most that they can do, as taking a chunk out of someone's head is quite different than leaving just a little cut on them. So with that, I think we can confidently cross both of the shadow animatronics off our list. And while we're here, I also like to quickly eliminate Endo-02. While yes, they are physically capable of biting someone, we are never shown that they are actually hostile. They just kind of show up and that's really about it. And I think Scott knows that it would just kind of be a lame and underwhelming answer to have this random endoskeleton with no identity be behind one of the most infamous events in the franchise of all time. So with that, I think we can confidently cross Endo-02 off from our list as well. So with all that being said, let's begin to talk about our actual suspects here. So let's talk about the Withered, shall we? We'll start off with Withered Bonnie, and I think it's safe to say that he didn't do it. Mainly because of the fact, well, he doesn't have an upper jaw. And we know the bite hasn't happened yet because the animatronics are still allowed to walk around during the day.
They've spent a small fortune on these new animatronics. Facial recognition, advanced mobility, they even let them walk around during the day. Isn't that neat?
So with that, we can confidently cross Withered Bonnie off of our list. Withered Chica probably also didn't do it, considering the fact that her jaw doesn't appear to be functional, and there isn't really much going for her, but there are 2 things that people will bring up that I want to discuss here. And the first thing is actually her addition to Help Wanted. When Help Wanted added the Withered animatronics in September of 2019, a lot of people noticed that on Withered Chica's model there appeared to be blood on her endoskeleton jaw. Now some people may take this as evidence, but I actually think I know what's going on here. When Steelwool was making the first Help Wanted, they ended up retexturing a lot of Scott's models when they were adjusting them to be able to fit into the game. And of course, while they took some creative liberties when retexturing some of Scott's models, with other ones however, it seems that they were trying to accurately recreate the original texture to the best of their abilities by using reference images. And there is this official render of Withered Chica's head, and if you notice you can see what looks like blood on her endojaw, and this is what most likely Steel will use when making new textures for Withered Chica. However, I don't think this is actually blood. What this most likely is actually is a red light illuminating on her, as you can see a faint one on the left side of her head, while also seeing a really strong one coming from the bottom right here, so that's most likely where the red comes from. Plus, the blood isn't even where it should be if she did bite someone, so overall, it probably just was a mistake from a Steelwool employee. But even if it was on Scott's model, it wouldn't be from the bite, as that would mean that it would have been there during the entirety of FNAF 2 even before the bite happened. And the second thing I wanted to bring up was this shirt someone found at like Spencer's, I think, where it showed Nightmare Chica with the phrase "The Bite of 87" on it. But that shirt was never actually released to the public, and it was likely cut for being lore inaccurate. And Scott has denounced the idea that he would ever use merchandise to reveal lore. So with all that being said, I think we can cross Withered Chica off of our list as well. Withered Golden Freddy probably also isn't the culprit behind the bite, as in the week before, we actually get to see how he kills you, which essentially involves him beginning to fry your brain, and then when he's actually up in your face, putting his hands on your head to presumably crush it. Now I know that this is classic Golden Freddy and not Withered Golden Freddy, but the classics and Withereds are pretty much the same character, so I see no reason as to assume why he wouldn't kill somewhat similarly in the second game. Like hell, in the week before, we can see that even Foxy, after he's been fully refurbished, he's still affected by the flashlight, and he isn't fooled by the mask like he was in FNAF 2. So these characters still act the same as they did in the previous location. Plus, I am aware about the fact that if you put 1987 in the FNAF 1 custom night, you do get Golden Freddy's jump scare. But this wasn't added in the game originally, it was added sometime after it had released, probably to stop rumors that if you put 1987 into the custom night, it would do something really special. And I know people will bring up the fact how he did the bite of 83, but for one, that was before the animatronic was possessed. And two, I feel like it would be kind of just redundant for Golden Freddy / Fredbear to be the culprit behind another bite again. And given how the context for this bite is pretty different, and since we now know how he actually kills people, I think we can confidently cross Withered Golden Freddy off of our list as well. Withered Freddy was actually a popular suspect at one point from what I remember, but I'm not really sure if he is anymore, but let's go over the evidence for him anyways. In FNAF 1, we have a rules of safety poster with the phrase "Don't touch Freddy" on it, which is kind of weird that it specifically calls out Freddy and not just say "Don't touch the animatronics." There's also a supposed handprint on Freddy's right eye, which both Help Wanted and the FNAF Character Encyclopedia double down on. But remember, this is classic Freddy in FNAF 1, and during FNAF 2, Freddy didn't have this costume on, so this handprint that appears right above his right eye in the first game wouldn't have been from the bite. There's also Withered Freddy's jump scare, which shows him biting up and down on the player rather than most of the other animatronics, which just shows them lunging towards us. However, we can see in most of the other games that the characters just often move their jaws up and down during their jump scares, so this isn't really something exclusive to Withered Freddy. Also, while the rules of safety poster does specifically just call out Freddy, this is most likely done in order to not break immersion for kids by saying the word animatronics, as there isn't really a reason you should be touching them in the first place unless you're like an employee or something. But, however, there is actually one thing going for Withered Freddy. In the week before, there's an ending where Ralph is standing in front of Freddy, and when he looks up at him, he wonders what life would be like without a frontal lobe. This is kind of a crazy line just to throw out there, so for the time being, I'm actually going to put a pin in Withered Freddy. And finally, Withered Foxy. I'm going to be honest here, I actually have quite a lot to say about him, but I don't want to say anything just yet, so I'll be saving him for later. So for the time being, let's move on to the toy animatronics. We have Toy Freddy as our first suspect here, and, well, he doesn't really have any evidence going for him. I guess his jaw hangs open a lot, but that's just something he does. I wouldn't really say that's evidence, so we can cross him off our list. Toy Bonnie also doesn't really have anything going for him as well, but there is one thing I would like to cover here. In 2020, Scott Cawthon announced the Fazbear Fanverse Initiative, a project to celebrate the 6th-year anniversary of Five Nights at Freddy's. It was a way for Scott to give a few FNAF fan game developers like Nixon, Emil Mako, Kane Carter to have previous games that they've made, and or allow them to make new games and have them be officially put on Steam, ported to consoles, and get official merchandise by technically making them official FNAF games. However, the thing I would like to focus on right now is the Pop Go series by Kane Carter. So basically, Pop Goes and Five Nights at Candy's are supposed to coexist in the same universe together, and it's a universe where only the events of the first 3 FNAF games happen, and they only use info from the first 3 games to create its stories. Like here, William Afton is named Simon Fitzgerald, Fredbear and Spring Bonnie have brown accessories like the Stage 01 minigame instead of the purple ones we officially see them with later on, and most relevant to this discussion, Toy Bonnie does the bite of 87. Now some of you may look at this and think to yourselves that since these are official FNAF games, then wouldn't that mean that this is official confirmation that Toy Bonnie did the bite? Well, no. As in 2020, Kane Carter actually put out a video about the Fanverse when it was first announced. And in it, he states that the Fazbear Fanverse games are not canon to the main FNAF story and should not be used as evidence, even touching on the Toy Bonnie thing in the tweet. Therefore saying we cannot use Pop Goes as proof that Toy Bonnie did the bite. which now means that Toy Bonnie has no evidence, and we can now cross him off our list as well. Now we have Toy Chica, and in more recent years, she's actually become quite a popular suspect for who did the bite of 87. So what's the evidence for her then? In 2015, when MatPat did that infamous livestream where he discussed the possibility of dream theory, Scott of course started updating his website with messages in order to point them in the right direction. One of those messages ended up asking the question, why would the tiny Toy Chica be missing her beak? This spawned a very small theory that Toy Chica may have actually done the bite of 87, and that idea would become much more popular a few years later. In 2018, we got the release of Ultimate Custom Night, and many characters finally got their own voices, which of course includes Toy Chica, and one of her voice lines grabbed some people's attention.
Where's my beak? Lodged in your forehead, of course.
This particular line caused a lot more people to start believing that Toy Chica did the bite, since the frontal lobe is located right behind the forehead. However, this isn't really as strong as some people may think. Toy Chica says that her beak is lodged in your forehead, not anything about a chunk missing from your forehead, which means her beak is still in it. Like if a person gets shot, you would say that the bullet is lodged in them. So if that's the case, then the voice line isn't about her taking a bite out of you, it's about her getting her beak stuck in your head, like how some birds peck wood or peck the ground to eat worms. However, we still don't really have a clear idea of what the message on Scott's website was supposed to be. So for now, we'll also put a pin in Toy Chica, and with that, let's move on to our next culprit. And finally, arguably the most popular suspect out of the entire franchise, Mangle. Now with Mangle being the most popular suspect, you'd think he'd have the most evidence, right? Well, that's kind of the shocking thing. Despite her being the most popular suspect, there isn't actually a lot of evidence to suggest that they were the biter. And the main piece of evidence that's going for him is actually her jump scare. In FNAF 2, when we see Mangle jump scare the player, we can see that when his head leans in, her mouth is more so going for the top of the head. Now on its own, that wouldn't really mean much, but if you take a look at all the other jump scares in the game, all of their jaws seem to be more so on the lower half of the screen. The other character who got the closest to the top of the head would be Withered Foxy, but his teeth seem to be just above the player's eyes, so he wouldn't have been able to bite the player's head from this angle in this jump scare. So Mangle's jump scare does have something going for it, but that's it. Mangle only has the jump scare. Sure, Mangle was always around customers, but so were the other toy animatronics, so that can't be really anything used to prove Mangle specifically. But I will be fair for Mangle's jump scare, and I will put a pin in Mangle as well. So what now? I've just eliminated all of the characters. But except, I said earlier that I would be saving Withered Foxy for later. That's because out of all of the characters, Withered Foxy shockingly has the most evidence going for him. So let's see what he has to show off then. So let's begin to discuss the most recent thing to push this theory forward, that being the week before. In this book, there are a few interesting things that are brought up about Foxy, like how Pirates Cove was shut down for the reopening of this location, warning people to stay away, and that tables were rearranged in the dining area so customers wouldn't get too close to the entrance of Pirates Cove. It's clear that Foxy is considered more dangerous compared to the other animatronics, but we can go further than this. In one of the endings of the week before, it's revealed that Ralph thinks the reason that Foxy was put out of order was because he seemed too dangerous for kids. Though as far as Ralph was aware, Foxy never bit any kids. In the actual book, the word kids is emphasized, which seems to imply that Foxy has at least bitten an adult. Now it makes sense that the animatronics have bitten people before. There's an ending where Bonnie actually bites Ralph, and of course we have the frontal lobe line with Freddy earlier. But Foxy was the only one they felt it was necessary to put out of order even after being fully refurbished. And it seems like it didn't have anything to do with malfunctioning problems since it's never implied that Foxy wasn't working right. So what other evidence is there for Withered Foxy? Throughout FNAF 4, there are multiple things that actually connect it back to FNAF 2. There's of course the 8s and 7s that were littered throughout the source code of Scott's website. There's also appearances from the toy animatronics as merchandise, and of course the appearance of Fredbear's, which was first mentioned in FNAF 2. Strangely enough, however, there are actually a lot of notable connections to Foxy as well. From the plush's head being ripped off, to him and Fredbear being paired with each other on the Fredbear and Friends TV show, and of course Mike wearing a Foxy mask and putting his brother in Fredbear's mouth, causing the bite. But the most damning thing actually comes from the FNAF 4 teasers. During the time when FNAF 4 teasers were being released, we got a look at each Nightmare animatronic with the tagline "Was it me?" on each teaser, and when you brighten up the images, they would reveal the secret phrase "Nightmare" written on them. However, when it came to Nightmare Foxy's teaser, instead of the phrase "Nightmare" being written on it when you brighten up the teaser, you would have received the phrase "out of order." And on top of that, when you darken the teaser image, you can very clearly see an 87 right in Foxy's eye, drawing a connection between Foxy being out of order in 1987. Now before we continue, I know there are probably many of you who are a little annoyed over a detail that I have not yet mentioned, that being FNAF 2's Night 6 newspaper, where it talks about the toy animatronics being scrapped due to possible malfunctions. Now on the surface, this would seem to devalue the idea that any of the withereds did the bite, since the toys are the ones being scrapped. However, this newspaper seems to actually have been written before the bite even happened. Let me explain. Pulling a game theory here, bringing some real world facts into this, according to Sapiens.com, in order for stories to be published in a newspaper, they would need at least 1 to 2 days to do so. But that's only if it's a breaking story, as otherwise it may take up to at least a few weeks. But for the sake of this argument, we'll say it's a breaking story, since it's a headline for the paper. That would mean this idea of the toys being scrapped, even if it only took 1 to 2 days to be reported, was already in motion before the bite even happened. And this actually perfectly lines up with something Ralph said 2 days earlier on Night 4, when he talks about the toys starting to act more unusual and aggressive towards adults.
Someone may have tampered with their facial recognition systems, we're not sure. But the characters have been acting very unusual, almost aggressive towards the staff. They interact with the kids just fine, but when they encounter an adult, they just stare.
And this lines up with what the newspaper actually says, that the toys are being scrapped due to possible malfunctions. If one of your new animatronics bit someone in the head in front of a bunch of people, surely it would be on the headline or mentioned somewhere in the article, but it's not. Which actually aligns with the idea that the newspaper is given to us before the bite even happened, since we never hear anything about it in the game. This also lines up with something that's mentioned in the week before. When Ralph is thinking about how the victim of the bite can't talk or really do much else, he mentions that because he can't talk, he wasn't able to say what happened, so because of that, the press blew the whole thing out of proportion. The fact that they went to the victim for information and no one else seems to say that there was no one else to witness the bite. Which is very weird since Jeremy is told to stay close to the animatronics and make sure they don't hurt anyone. So the fact that no one else knows what happened besides him seems to show that the bite of 87 wasn't a public event. Which tracks when Ralph mentions that he was thanked for helping put the rumors of the bite of 87 to rest. Something else that we learned in the week before is that the animatronics can actually leave the building and aren't actually stuck inside. However, they do have batteries that need to be recharged, so they can't actually stay outside the pizzeria for that long. There are multiple endings where Foxy himself just follows you home, either by himself or with the rest of his bandmates, but it's usually Foxy who does it the most. And we do have something that connects back to this idea about Foxy following security guards home, that being the survival logbook. On page 80 of the survival logbook, we have a quote left from a previous night guard that appears to be from Jeremy Fitzgerald himself, and to read the quote specifically, "I only been on the night shift for about a week, but I was relieved to be switched over to the day shift. There's a lot of stress working 12 AM to 6 AM. My boss had told me that the animatronics were acting strangely, almost aggressive towards the staff, but I wasn't about to let that scare me off. After work, I had an unsettling feeling that I was being followed home." This is almost certainly from Jeremy Fitzgerald, as not only does he repeat a line almost word for word from the Night 4 FNAF 2 phone call, but also it's on a page about switching to the day shift, which is what the Night 6 phone call is about, Jeremy being moved to the day shift tomorrow. Now this on its own doesn't actually prove what character did the bite. All it suggests is that the bite didn't happen in the restaurant. But coupled with everything else we've talked about so far, and I think it paints a pretty clear image. After Jeremy's final shift, Withered Foxy follows him outside and attacks him, potentially in his own home. Now many people are going to try to say that when Ralph talks about Foxy, he's actually referring to Funtime Foxy, or Mangle, because Mangle is a version of Foxy, so maybe he's referring to them as mascot characters. And while sure, they are both Foxies, even as mascot characters, Foxy and Funtime Foxy are still two separate characters. And this has been made very clear in multiple pieces of media. In the Help 1-in-1 Trick or Treat level, we can see what appears to be the mask of the FNAF 4 bullies alongside masks of BB and Funtime Foxy. In Help 1 and 2, we have the Carousel level that appears to be at Fall Fest. We can see that both the classics and the toys coexist together on the carousel. And in FNAF 4, we have merchandise of both the classics and the toys, showing that they've always been separate mascot characters since the early days. But even then, the week before brings up the Bite of 83 and connects it to Fredbear's, but the book never brings up the toy animatronics. But the book does talk about how Foxy previously bit an adult, and on that page it says this animatronic. Not this character or previous version of Foxy, this specific machine that's right in front of Ralph in this ending is talked about biting an adult before. So sure, Withered Freddy might have the line from Ralph, and Toy Chica might have the cryptic teaser, and Mangle may have the jump scare, but when you compare it all to what Withered Foxy has, is it even really a contest? Like for Mangle, it is just a jump scare, and Scott hasn't done anything else like this in the franchise. Like in FNAF 4, when Nightmare Fredbear jump scares you, his jaw is on the bottom half of the screen, and this is the game where we see his normal counterpart bite someone. If Scott wanted us to place more importance on this, I'm sure he would have made it a lot more apparent, but he doesn't. And in every other FNAF game, there isn't any big lore relevance about the way the characters jump scare the player, which includes Mangle. The tiny Toy Chica beak teaser was pretty cryptic and we still don't really know what it means. Although I would like to recommend this video by Sam Barr and his take on the line. Check it out, it's pretty interesting. And for the Withered Freddy line, I like to remind people that classic Freddy looks pretty much identical to Fredbear minus a few small proportional changes to his head. And since the big bite is brought up within this book, it makes sense that Ralph would have it on his mind when looking up at Freddy in this ending. And with that, I think we can finally cross these last three characters off of our list as well. Now some of you may be asking, if Withered Foxy did the Bite of 87, why are the toys being scrapped and not the Withereds? Well, as we already discussed earlier, they were already planning on scrapping the toys due to how they were acting towards customers publicly. And to our knowledge, the Withers never did anything like that publicly with customers. And since they're on a lower budget now, it would make sense to reuse the older animatronics, but this wouldn't be the first time they've technically done something like this. After the big bite, the Springlock animatronics weren't immediately scrapped. Sure, Fredbear's was probably closed because of the big bite, but they ended up just being demoted to being used as spare costumes, and could still roam Freddy's locations in animatronic mode. It was only later when the Springlock failures happened at the sister location was it decided that they were too dangerous to use. Also, I should probably mention this right now, no, the Bite of 83 is not the Springlock failure. A Springlock failure can only happen if the Springlock animatronic is in costume mode. And since Fredbear was in animatronic mode during the Bite of 83 cannot be considered a Springlock failure. My point being is that after the Fredbear Springlock suit bit someone, the Springlock animatronics were only demoted, not outright retired or scrapped. The same thing happens with the puppet. The puppet was originally a security system, but after it failed to save Charlie, it was demoted to working at the prize corner, and once again not scrapped or retired outright. The same logic would also apply to the Withereds. Animatronics are allowed to walk around during the day with customers, but once the Bite of 87 happens, the Withereds are refurbished into the classics, but are demoted to only performing on stage, and are no longer allowed to walk around during the day, with them even deciding that Foxy himself was still too dangerous and put Pirates Cove out of order for the time being. So after all of this, what is my final conclusion? The Bite of 87 was not a public event and was something that never had proper reportage. Jeremy Fitzgerald was followed home after his final night shift, Withered Foxy is the most evidence supporting him out of any character, and Fazbear Entertainment has been shown to demote dangerous or failed animatronics rather than outright scrap them. I think the answer is very clear. So there you go, that's my first ever FNAF Theory video. This took way longer than it probably should have, but I'm happy to have it done now. This video is my first time doing something like this, but I try to put in as much effort as I possibly could. So if there's any errors with the audio or editing, it's probably because of my lack of experience with this. I would like to thank Elena Woodlands for her Body of 87 video, as it is what sold me on Withered Foxy doing the Body of 87, and I just kind of found more evidence and threw it into this video. So I'll have a link for her channel down in the description. Anyways, please remember to keep comments respectful whether you agree or disagree with the theory or not. This is just the scary bear game I'm talking about here. And I'll try to read all of the comments I can. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed. I've already started working on my second video, so stay tuned for that. But other than that, I'll see you guys later. Peace.